to you about embedding quotations in your essays. We're going to learn how to embed quotation into your essay so that your essay reads fluently or reads well. This is a big issue. This is the issue. Most students know that they have to provide evidence and quotation to back up their points, but many do not write very elegantly when they do so. Let's give you an example of this. Okay, we've got this example of an essay based around the idea of how is Romeo presented in Act 2, Scene 2 of Romeo and Juliet. Let's look at this. In Act 2, Scene 2, Romeo is presented as being in love with Juliet. He quotes, "The brightness of her cheek would shame those stars as daylight doth a lamp. Her eyes in heaven would through the airy region stream so bright that birds would sing and think it were not." In this quote, Romeo says that if Juliet were in heaven, she would shine more brightly than the stars, and the birds would sing because they would think it was daytime, not the nighttime. This quote proves that he's in love with Juliet. Okay, well, firstly, there's not a lot wrong with this sort of quotation that this candidate has got. Okay, so we're looking at this quote, aren't we? Which is the candidate's got he or she has got quite a long quote. Actually, he's quoting 2 lines of the verse. Doesn't actually put into the verse where the line endings happen. Remember, in Shakespeare, you have to indicate that he's writing poetry, and he writes poetry by having 10 syllables in a line, 5 main beats. And this candidate has shown no evidence that they understand that. They've also written a rather long quote and then explained it after they've quoted it. This is something that a lot of candidates do, but I would advise you to actually embed the quotes into the essay. Here's an example of perhaps it done a bit better. Romeo's soliloquy before he meets Juliet is important to analyse because it reveals that Shakespeare presents him as being very much in love with Juliet. Throughout his soliloquy, he compares Juliet to being like the sun and being a source of light. He imagines what would happen if her eyes were in the sky and asserts that the brightness of her cheek would shame those stars, in the same way that the strong light of day reveals a lamp to being ineffectual. He then takes his extended metaphor a step further by saying that the light from her eyes would create the day and the night, and they would stream so bright that the birds would sing. His comparison presents Juliet as being godlike and incredibly powerful, a source of light. It also suggests that the power of his feelings. He appears to worship her like a pilgrim worships God. So can you see what I've done here? I've embedded smaller chunks of the quotes into the essay and explained a bit more fully what actually is going on in the speech. Okay, so let's look at this first sentence. I've said that it's a soliloquy, and I talk about how he presents him as being very much in love with Juliet. Similar to this, but a bit more fully explained. Then I use the term soliloquy again, and I talk about what's been happening early on in the speech. He compares Juliet to being like the sun and being a source of light. So I'm showing awareness of the whole speech, not just one little quote. And then I explain perhaps a bit more of the quote. He imagines that if her eyes were in the sky, and asserts that the brightness of her cheek would shame those stars. What would happen if her eyes were in the sky? And then I begin to analyse it, quoting a bit more here. It's worth taking a look a bit more at this, stopping the video and just reading it through again so that you think about how to embed quotes. These are the key points. Make sure your quotes are not too long and they're embedded in the sentence in quotation marks, correctly punctuated. The context of the quote is fully explained. It's clear that what's been happening before before and after the quotation. This is really important. I find a lot of people just sort of slap down a quote and they don't explain what's been happening before or after the quote, why the quote's important. They don't really say how it relates to the question. It's just put there and then perhaps explained a bit, but it's never fully explained. There is analysis of the effect of a quotation and the question is answered. All of these things need to be borne in mind. Here's some sentences to rewrite, again, perhaps indicative of what a lot of candidates do. They just sort of slap down a quote and then say this is what they think it's about. I'd like you to have a go, and this one hasn't even done that. I'd like you to have a go at trying to break these quotations down into smaller quotes that are much more fully explained. Okay, off you go.